The sound of laughter echoed through the spacious classroom, drawing the attention of almost everyone inside. At the center of it all was Madison, the most popular girl in school, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her designer notebook as she leaned forward with a smirk. Her target? A quiet boy named Ethan, who sat at the edge of the room, his head slightly bowed as he flipped through an old textbook. Unlike the others, Ethan never wore flashy clothes or designer brands. His hoodie was faded, his jeans slightly worn, and his sneakers had visible creases. He never seemed to care about the latest fashion trends, which made him an easy target for someone like Madison. "Hey, Ethan," she called out, her voice dripping with amusement. "Did your parents get that outfit from a thrift store?" A few of her friends giggled while some students exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan paused for a moment before calmly looking up. His hazel eyes met hers, but instead of anger or embarrassment, there was only indifference. "I don't see how my clothes affect you," he replied simply. Madison scoffed. "Oh, come on. We're in high school, Ethan. Appearance matters. You look like you just walked out of a bargain bin." A few more students laughed, but not everyone found it funny. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, while others avoided looking in Ethan's direction. Ethan, however, didn't react the way Madison expected. He didn't shrink back or lash out. Instead, he just shook his head with a small, knowing smile. "If you say so," he murmured before turning back to his book. That only irritated Madison more. She was used to people reacting, either with embarrassment or anger. But Ethan? He acted as if her words meant nothing. Little did she know, she was about to get a reality check that would turn her world upside down. The rest of the day passed without much change. Madison had moved on, focusing her attention on more exciting things, like planning a weekend shopping spree with her friends. Ethan, as always, stayed quiet, blending into the background like he always did. But things took a surprising turn when their teacher, Mr. Reynolds, made an announcement at the end of class. "Before you leave, I want to remind you all about the upcoming group project," he said, adjusting his glasses. "You'll be working in pairs, and since I know some of you would just pick your friends, I've decided to assign the partners myself." A few groans filled the room, but Madison barely paid attention until she heard her name. "Madison and Ethan, you two will be working together," Mr. Reynolds declared. Her jaw nearly dropped. She glanced at Ethan, expecting to see him look just as horrified, but he only nodded, as if the pairing didn't bother him at all. Madison, on the other hand, was not thrilled. Of all the people she could have been stuck with, it had to be him? The boy who dressed like he belonged in another decade? The boy who barely spoke to anyone? After class, she approached him, arms crossed. "All right, Ethan, let's just get this over with. My schedule is packed, so we can meet at my house tomorrow." Ethan gave her a small smile. "Actually, I'd prefer if we worked at my place." Madison blinked, taken aback. "Your place?" "Yeah, it's quieter and I have everything we need to get the project done." She hesitated. The idea of going to Ethan's house was not appealing, but at the same time, she didn't want him in her perfectly decorated home either. "Fine," she sighed dramatically. "Text me your address." Ethan simply nodded and walked away. As Madison grabbed her phone and glanced at the address he had sent, she frowned. Something about it felt off. The neighborhood name looked oddly familiar, but it couldn't be. Could it? Shrugging it off, she decided she would just get this over with. Little did she know, what awaited her at Ethan's house would leave her speechless. The next afternoon, Madison's driver pulled up in front of a massive gated estate. She sat in the back seat, scrolling through her phone absent-mindedly until she noticed the car had stopped. "We're here, Miss Madison," the driver announced. Frowning, she looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. Towering in front of her was one of the largest mansions she had ever seen. The estate was surrounded by tall, elegant gates with gold accents, and beyond them lay a perfectly manicured lawn that stretched as far as the eye could see. A grand modern mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows and intricate architecture stood at the end of a long, paved driveway. Her heart pounded in confusion. "This can't be right," she muttered, checking the address on her phone again. It matched. But how? Ethan lived here? Before she could process the shock, the gates slowly opened, and a uniformed security guard gave her a polite nod. "Welcome, Miss Madison. Master Ethan is expecting you. Master Ethan? Still in a daze, she stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the smooth driveway as she made her way toward the entrance. As she walked, she took in the sight of luxury cars parked neatly in the garage, several brands she recognized from high-end fashion magazines. Her head spun. This didn't make sense. If Ethan was this wealthy, why did he dress like that? The front door opened before she could knock, and there stood Ethan, dressed in his usual hoodie and jeans, looking completely unfazed. "Hey, you made it," he said casually. Madison stared at him, speechless. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You coming in or just planning to stand there all day?" She swallowed hard, stepping inside. She had come to work on a school project, but what she was about to learn about Ethan's life would change everything she thought she knew. Madison stepped inside, her designer heels sinking slightly into the plush marble flooring. The grand foyer was breathtaking. An enormous chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow across the spacious entrance hall. A wide staircase with an ornate railing curved up to the second floor, and expensive artwork lined the walls. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. How was this possible? Ethan closed the door behind her. "You want something to drink?" he asked, as if this was just another average day. She turned to face him, still trying to process everything. "Ethan, what is this?" she finally blurted out. "My house," he replied simply. Her eyes narrowed. "I know that, but why? How?" She gestured wildly around. "You live in a mansion. You have security guards, luxury cars, a freaking chandelier bigger than my bedroom. Why do you act like you don't have money?" Ethan let out a small chuckle. "I don't act like anything, Madison. I just don't see the point in flaunting it." Madison folded her arms. "But why? If I had this kind of money, I'd..." She stopped herself. Ethan smirked slightly. "You'd do what? Wear designer clothes every day? Show off expensive things so people would treat you differently?" She opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated. That was exactly what she would do. But now, standing here in Ethan's house, it suddenly felt shallow. Before she could find the right words, an older woman in a crisp uniform walked into the room. "Master Ethan, your father is expecting you in the study shortly," she said with a respectful nod. Madison caught the words immediately. "Master Ethan again." Ethan sighed. "Got it, Martha. Tell him I'll be there soon." The woman left, and Madison stared at him in disbelief. "Master Ethan?" she repeated. "Seriously? Who are you?" He gave her an amused look. "Guess you'll find out soon enough." She didn't know what shocked her more, that Ethan lived in a mansion, or that he clearly had a life she knew nothing about. And something told her she was only scratching the surface. Madison followed Ethan through a long hallway, still trying to wrap her head around everything. The walls were lined with elegant paintings, the kind she had only seen in museums. Every corner of the mansion spoke of wealth, yet Ethan carried himself as if none of it mattered. Finally, they entered a massive study. Dark wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with books that looked older than Madison herself. A large desk sat near the window, and behind it stood a tall, well-dressed man with an air of quiet authority. His piercing blue eyes landed on Ethan first, then shifted to Madison. "Ethan," the man greeted, his voice calm but firm. "And this must be your classmate?" Ethan nodded. "Dad, this is Madison. We're working on a school project together." Madison straightened slightly, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "Nice to meet you, sir," she said, her voice more formal than usual. The man studied her for a moment before nodding in acknowledgement. "I see," he said. "Well, I assume Ethan has already told you everything?" Madison frowned. "Told me what exactly?" Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Dad, we were just about to start the project. No need for dramatic reveals." His father ignored him and turned back to Madison. "I imagine you're quite surprised by our home." Madison let out a breathless laugh. "That's an understatement." The man offered a small smile. "Well, to clear things up, our family is in real estate development. We own multiple luxury properties across the country. This house is one of them." Madison's head spun. "So, you're saying Ethan is rich? Ethan groaned. "Please don't say it like that," his father chuckled. "We've always believed that wealth should be handled with humility. That's why Ethan was raised to understand the value of hard work. He doesn't show off, because money doesn't define him." Madison blinked. The idea was completely foreign to her. She had spent her whole life believing wealth was identity. Ethan gave her a knowing look. Now, do you see why I don't care about brands or labels? For the first time, Madison felt embarrassed, not of Ethan, but of herself. She had judged him, mocked him, and assumed he was less because he didn't flaunt his wealth like she did. And yet, standing in this house, surrounded by quiet luxury, she was starting to realize maybe Ethan had been right all along. Madison sat stiffly in one of the elegant chairs in the study, her mind still racing. Everything she had thought about Ethan had been completely wrong. She had mocked him for wearing simple clothes, assuming he was poor, when in reality, he had more wealth than she could ever imagine. But unlike her, he didn't feel the need to prove anything. Ethan's father turned to his son. I won't keep you long. I just wanted to remind you that your grandfather's foundation event is this weekend. I expect you to attend. Ethan sighed. Yeah, I know. Madison's ears perked up. A foundation event? That sounded like something for important people. Before she could ask, Ethan stood up. All right, Madison, let's go work on the project. I assume you still want to finish it? She nodded quickly, following him out of the study and into a smaller but still grand room that looked like a private library. The walls were filled with books, and the long wooden table in the center had notebooks and a sleek laptop on it. As they sat down, Madison glanced at Ethan. So, you're basically billionaire rich and you just walk around school like it's nothing? Ethan smirked. Pretty much. But why? She pressed. You could wear the best clothes, drive the best cars, have people lining up to be your friend. Why would you choose to blend in? Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Because I don't want fake friends. I don't want people to like me because of my money. I want them to like me. Madison fell silent. His words hit harder than she expected. She thought back to her own life. Her friends admired her for her designer bags, her expensive vacations, and the fact that her family was well known in high society. But if all of that disappeared tomorrow, would they still be there? She wasn't sure. Ethan turned his attention to the project, flipping open a notebook. So, let's get started. But Madison could barely focus. For the first time in her life, she was questioning everything she had ever valued. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she liked the answers. As Ethan began discussing their project, Madison struggled to concentrate. Her mind kept replaying everything she had just learned. She had spent years believing wealth was something to be flaunted, something that determined a person's worth. Yet, here was Ethan, someone wealthier than most people could dream of, who lived like an average student without arrogance or entitlement. Madison? Ethan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She blinked, realizing she had been staring at the notes without actually reading them. Huh? I asked if you wanted to divide the research or work on it together. He repeated patiently. Oh, together is fine, she mumbled. Ethan studied her for a moment. Are you okay? She hesitated before sighing. Honestly, I don't know. He set his pen down. Because of what you learned today? She nodded. I guess I just feel stupid. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Why? Madison bit her lip, something she rarely did. Because I judged you. I assumed things about you just because of the way you dressed. I even laughed at you. She let out a humorless chuckle. And now, standing in your mansion, I feel ridiculous. Ethan didn't gloat or smirk. Instead, he gave her a small, understanding smile. Madison, people judge others all the time. What matters is whether they learn from it. She exhaled slowly. I don't think I like the person I've been. He tilted his head. Then maybe it's time to change. The words were simple, but they hit her hard. She had spent her whole life valuing status, labels, and wealth. She had laughed at people who had less, believing they were beneath her. But now, sitting across from Ethan, someone who had everything yet didn't let it define him, she realized how shallow she had been. For the first time, she wanted to be different, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid to admit it. As the evening went on, Madison found herself surprisingly comfortable in Ethan's home. The overwhelming luxury that had shocked her at first was no longer what stood out the most. Instead, it was the warmth of the place, the way Ethan's parents spoke to him with respect, the way the house felt lived in despite its grandeur. It wasn't just a mansion. It was a home. They worked on their project for a while, but Madison couldn't stop herself from asking more questions. So, if you have all this money, why don't you just go to a private school? Why stay in a regular one? Ethan smirked. And deal with a bunch of rich kids who only care about social status? No thanks. Madison winced. Ouch. Ethan chuckled. I didn't mean it that way. He leaned forward, his expression more serious. Look, I know what it's like to be surrounded by people who only like you for what you have. My parents raised me to understand that wealth isn't what makes you valuable. It's how you treat people. That's why I like being around real people. People who don't suck up to me just because of my last name. Madison swallowed hard. She knew exactly what he meant. Her so-called friends at school, were they really her friends? Or did they only stick around because she threw the best parties, wore designer brands, and had parents who could get them into exclusive events? Would they still be there if she had nothing? I've been so focused on status and image, she admitted quietly. It never even crossed my mind that there could be more to life than just being admired. Ethan gave her a thoughtful look. Admired or liked, Madison's stomach twisted. She had spent her whole life making sure people admired her. But had anyone actually liked her for who she was without all the labels? She didn't know. And that realization shook her more than anything. The next few days felt different for Madison. She walked into school with a strange sense of unease, her mind constantly replaying the conversation she'd had with Ethan. She had always been the center of attention, everyone knew her name, and she liked it that way. But now, as she sat in her usual spot at lunch, surrounded by the same group of friends, everything seemed empty. Her friends chatted loudly about the latest designer trends and the parties they were planning for the weekend. As they spoke, Madison tried to listen, but the words felt hollow. She glanced around the cafeteria, her gaze falling on the students who weren't part of the in crowd. The ones who didn't wear the latest clothes or hang out at exclusive spots. For the first time, they didn't seem invisible to her. She turned her attention back to her group, but when she spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. Do you guys ever wonder if people only like us because of our clothes and parties? The table fell silent for a moment, the sudden shift in conversation catching everyone off guard. One of her friends, Lauren, rolled her eyes. What are you talking about? Of course people like us because of that. Who wouldn't? Madison felt a pang of disappointment. But what if that's not enough? What if we're just pretending? Another friend, Rachel, laughed. You're overthinking things, Madison. Who cares if people like us for what we have? It's not like we're hurting anyone. Madison nodded slowly, but inside, she felt conflicted. She couldn't help but think about Ethan again. He had everything she had ever wanted, but he didn't seem to care about any of it. And now, it felt like her life was built on something she no longer wanted to be a part of. That afternoon, Madison found herself walking to the library alone. She hadn't planned to go, but she needed space to think. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a moment before typing a message to Ethan. Hey, do you want to hang out later? I feel like I need to talk to you about something. She hit send, not sure what kind of response she would get. She wasn't even sure what she wanted to say. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. Sure, I'm free. Meet me at the park after school? Madison smiled, relieved. She needed to talk to him more than she realized. After school, Madison made her way to the park, her thoughts a whirlwind. She felt like she was on the edge of something, a change, a realization, but she wasn't entirely sure what it was. She'd spent so much of her life focused on fitting in, on impressing people, but now it all felt so empty. As she walked through the park, she spotted Ethan sitting on a bench, his legs stretched out in front of him, his usual calm expression on his face. When he saw her approaching, he smiled. You made it, he said, standing up. You okay? Madison nodded, though her heart was still heavy. I'm not sure. They sat down together on the bench, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of children playing in the distance and birds chirping filled the air, but all Madison could hear was the rush of her thoughts. Finally, she broke the silence. Ethan, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to unlearn everything I've spent years believing. Ethan looked at her, his gaze kind but not pitying. You don't have to fix it all at once. It's not about being perfect. It's about being real. Madison let out a breath, feeling the weight of her words. But how do I know if I'm being real? I've spent so much time pretending to be someone I'm not. Ethan smiled gently. The real you is in there, Madison. You just have to stop letting the things around you define who you are. It's not the clothes, the parties, or even the friends. It's what's inside. His words struck her deeply. She had been running after an image, a version of herself that was built on external things, on what others thought of her, on how much attention she could get. But now, sitting beside Ethan, she understood something she had never even considered. True value wasn't in how others saw her. It was in how she saw herself. I think I've been scared, she admitted, her voice small. Scared that if I stopped being the person everyone expects me to be, they'd stop liking me. Ethan nodded. That's natural. But people who only like you because of what you have aren't the kind of people who are worth keeping around. You deserve friends who like you for who you are, not for what you wear or what you can offer. Madison looked down at her hands, feeling the truth in his words. She thought about her friends, the ones she had spent so much time impressing. But now, she couldn't help but wonder, were they really her friends, or had she been living in a world of illusion? For the first time, she was starting to see things clearly. I think I need to make some changes, she said softly. Ethan smiled. Good, but take your time. It's not about becoming someone new, it's about becoming yourself. Madison nodded, a sense of peace settling in her chest. She wasn't sure what the future held or how her life would change, but she knew one thing for sure. She was done pretending. And for the first time, she felt like she was starting to find out who she really was. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey. We hope you enjoyed the story and felt every twist and turn along the way. If you liked it, please make sure to give us a thumbs up and leave a comment below with your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on more amazing stories, and share this with your friends so they can experience it too. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, keep believing in the power of change and new beginnings.